welcome to another video. Today it is part 5 of the Vogue 8577 sew along, and we're going to be finishing off the bodice and working on the facings. Let's get started. Okay, so we've already done all of the skirt sections. It says here, lining and facing, prepare bodice and middle section lining in same manner as bodice and middle section. So we've done that as we've gone along, so you should now all have a bodice lining that's not sewn at the side seams and a bodice main fabric that's not sewn at the side seams. You should also have a main fabric skirt and a lining skirt. Right, so the next section we're going to is 39, fuse interfacing to wrong side of front facing sections following manufacturer's instructions. Here's one I prepared earlier. I got to say it twice. So the next thing you want to do is finish the unmarked raw edge of your facing. Now the raw edge is this one that goes into the long point that I made you extend the point of, and what we're going to do is finish that with bias binding, and I'm going to show you how I do that. Okay, so we've got the same bias binding that we used for the hem, and this is the unfinished raw edge of our facing piece, and it is right side down, so you want to pin the right side of the bias binding to the wrong side of the facing piece, and again I'm doing this through the viewfinder, so if I stab my fingers it's not going to be that much of a surprise. Okay, so again I've just got that one pin in there to start me off. I've not gone right up to the edge. I've tried to mark the fold in the binding with the widest, the width that matches on the facing piece, and I am going to sew that all the way down in this ditch that's created by the fold lining up the edge of the bias binding with the edge of the facing piece. That's no good. Had my camera touching the touchscreen of my sewing machine. It put me into the embroidery unit. Don't want that. Okay, back stitch at the top, and then just line it up, sew a few centimetres, line it up again, and continue that right to the end. Okay, so back stitch at the end. Oh. And then you want to just chop it off along the end there. You want to do exactly the same thing with your other facing, but because you want to sew on the inside, you're going to have to start at the blunt edge. So just make sure that you're getting it attached to the outside edge that you need to. Which I am. So do exactly the same thing with this one. Okay, to finish off the bias binding, I'm actually going to use my blind stitch foot. So this is the foot that has the guide in the middle, and you can move your needle position over to the left, which is what you want. Okay, so I'm moving my needle as far over as it will go, and I'm not going to get my camera touching my touchscreen on my sewing machine. Let's try and avoid that. So you want to now have your facing right side up. That's the bias binding is that's where we've sewn the bias binding onto. You want to, like that, you want to wrap it around, and then you're going to wrap it over again. You may want to pin this I don't. I've gotten used to this method, but you may wish to pin this. So I'm going to put this under, get the threads out of the way, I'm going to push that over, I'm going to push this under my presser foot. So that the guide, this bit, is right up against the edge of the bias binding, and that way it will help me get a straight line and make sure that I catch all of the bias binding and sew it down as I sew. You want to back stitch at the start, and then how I hope you can see this, how I like to do it is I kind of smooth that bit down with this one and then push the bias binding over with that one. And again, there is no rush. You want to get this as neat and accurate as you can. And I'm not watching my needle, my needle's doing what it needs to do. What I'm watching is the front of the presser foot and this guide to make sure that it is right up against the bias binding. And you get to the top, back stitch. Oh. Now you will need to give this a press. But there you go, you have beautifully top stitched bias binding. And from the back, it will waver a little bit because I wasn't 100% accurate in sewing in the groove the first time round. So as you can see, it kind of goes off there and on there. But this is the part that is going to get seen, and that bit looks beautiful. So you want to repeat that on the other piece. Once you've top stitched your bias binding down, you want to give it a good press, remembering to not make your iron too hot so that you don't burn your binding. Okay, so step 40, finish unmarked raw edge. That's what we've just done. Pin wrong side of front facing to right side of lining, having raw edges even, based along seam lines. Note, lower edge of facing will extend below lining. Well, you're damn right it will, because we haven't attached the skirt, so you're going to have really long flappy bits. What you want to do is exactly as they say here. You want to pin the wrong side of the front facing to the right side of the lining, but you want to stop stitching just past this middle section. So you want to stop around halfway in the middle of the middle section, back stitch, and then leave the rest hanging. Okay, so we have the lining right side up, so the darts and the seams are all on the inside, and we have the facing right side up, so the wrong side of the facing is attached to the right side of the lining, and I have pinned that along this raw edge, and I have stopped around, so there's about 2/3 of the middle portion left, and that is where I'm going to stop stitching. And you want to baste this on. So I'm going to baste it 3/8 of an inch, which is what I would recommend to you guys as well, 3/8 of an inch the whole way around, and pivot at this corner. Remember to put your normal sewing foot on and move your needle back into the center. You don't want to be sewing off center or squiffy. No squiffy sewing, thank you. This is what you should end up with, so it's all neatly basted along there. I've stopped my stitching about 1/3 of the way into the middle front section, and then you have long flappy bit down here. So yes, the facing is longer than the lining, the pattern is correct. So you want to repeat this process on the other side. Okay, so you should at this point have ended up with something that looks a little bit like this. Your front bodice facings coming away about 2/3 of the way, maybe even more, up from the middle front parts, and no sewn together side seams and super long flappy bits. So now what we're going to do is sandwich this together with our main fabric bodice lining, and we're going to sew all the way around the edge, and starting from here and finishing here. So this is what the pattern wants us to do at step 41. With right sides together, pin facing and lining to dress, having raw edges even. Stitch along front opening and neck edge as shown. Trim. Also, you want to notch into any curved bits so they lie flat. Understitch facing and lining as far as possible. So we're going to do all of that, but we're only going to do it up to about there. So basically what we have here is a facing sandwich. So you've got the wrong side of the lining and the wrong side of the main fabric, and then you have the facing sandwiched in between those, and you're matching up all the points. So there's the corner there, there is a notch there, and then you have your shoulder seam, your back seam, and you want to pin down. This is the middle section, so I've matched those up, and you want to sew to around about the same place as you did with the front facing, about an inch and a half down into the middle section. So the way I like to pin is that I anchor the main points, like the seams and the notches, and then I pin in between those. Okay, so this is all sewn. I have stopped around about an inch and a half, 2 inches down from the middle front seam, pivoted on this corner, and just gone all the way around and right down to the same on this side. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out all of the bulk from here. I'm going to trim the seams. I am going to notch into, but not close to, but not up to or cutting through the stitching line, especially around the neck. So this will help me turn everything out and get a smooth unpuckered line. And once I've done all that, I'm then going to press. Okay, I've taken out loads of bulk from there. I've left this seam intact for now. I've halved this seam, and I actually am going to clip into that a little bit. I've halved it right the way up to the shoulder seam, and then I've left this one full and I've clipped into all the curves, and then I've done the same around the other side. But I am just going to clip into this bit just to ease that curve when I'm turning it around as well. Okay, so once it's all sewn down, you're going to want to press all of your seam allowances towards the lining. You are going to struggle to do that where this point meets, but you want to do it as far as you can up to, and then as far as you can around the neck and down the fronts, and then you want to turn it right all around to the right side and press that point. Okay, so the next stage is understitching, so that's why we've pressed all of this over to the lining side. So I've got my main fabric this side, I have the lining, the facing, and all of the seam allowance over to this side, and we're going to stitch as close to the stitching line, sort of 1/8 of an inch away, all the way around. You will struggle to do this into the points, don't worry. As long as you've clipped and notched them properly, they will lie flat, as you've just seen when I was pressing. With this as well, you want to start probably about 2-3 inches up from where we finished stitching, so that when we come to do this, when we've attached the skirt, the bodice to the skirt, we can carry on the understitching line, and you can get in there and get at this understitching. So start about, as I say, about 2-3 inches away from where you finish stitching the bodice, lining and main fabric and lining together. I'll show you what I'm doing once I'm in the halfway through. Okay, so I've done my first little bit of understitching just along here, and I've managed to get quite far up into the point, not all the way. And then on the right side of the fabric, you can't see anything on your dress fabric, but on your lining, and here is your facing, you will be able to see a line of stitches. So I'm going to start mine again from around about there, and this is just going to help the lining stay inside of your fashion fabric. Okay, now that you've understitched everything, you want to give it a good press, and here you can see why I told you to make this point longer. Let's get this in focus. To make this point longer, because if we hadn't have made it longer, it wouldn't. The other one finished here, so you would have ended up with a flappy bit, kind of not caught into the seam, And again, ask me how I know. I did this with my first one, so that's why I've advised you to lengthen this point. So we're going to press everything down now so that it all lies nice and flat. Okay, everything's pressed, and as you can see, because we've done the understitching, the main fabric has a tendency to roll just inside to the lining, which will help the lining to not show, and it's done that the whole way around. So you now have a beautifully finished front edge. So now we're going to actually sew the armholes together. So what you want to do is match up all of these points. So the yoke, there is notches here, so you want to match those up. And you're going to sew from one underarm all the way around to the other underarm. I'll show you when it's pinned. The other thing you want to do is when you're pinning, you want your lining to be sticking out by about 1/8 of an inch. And again, I'll show you once it's pinned. Here we go, it's all pinned together, all the way from one underarm right round to the other. And as I mentioned, there we go, you can see it there. I've kept the lining about 1/8 of an inch outside of the main fabric, and that just means that when you sew this together, the line is going to be 1/8 of an inch smaller, which will give it the tendency to roll to the inside, which means that you shouldn't get any of your lining peeking out and showing in the armholes. Now, the reason that I have deviated from the pattern and not sewn the side seams up beforehand is because the pattern wants you to baste your armhole edges together and then hand sew them later. So for the sleeveless one, if you'd followed the instructions, it would have had you finish the armhole by bias binding, which is totally fine, and if you like hand sewing, not a problem. But we're going to be spending a lot of hours hand sewing 6 meters of hem and the facings down on this thing later. So for me personally, I prefer a machine finish when I can do it on this kind of area. So that's why I'm doing things in this order. Okay, so once you've sewn that seam, you want to finish your fabric edge, and then you want to clip into the curves, especially around here. This will help your underarms and your armholes to lie flat. Right, I'm going to repeat this on the other side. Okay, you have got a very weird looking inside out bodice. So what you want to do is from the back side, you want to reach up in between, go through the shoulder, come to the front, and you want to grab all of your front piece and pull it through. And you want to get all of your facing through. Claire calls this pulling an elephant through a cat flap or a letterbox, and she's not wrong. So same thing, this is the back bodice, going to reach up through the shoulder area right down to the front, grab hold of all of it and pull it through. This is always my favourite bit of making a dress, because it's suddenly like, oh, magic. And this way, we haven't pressed them yet obviously, but you have nicely finished armholes. So the next step is to press them. So when I'm pressing, I don't generally tend to do this from the inside, so that I can help the lining to roll just slightly onto the inside of the garment. And yeah, I'm really happy with that. And I'm going to do the other side. Okay, now we're going to sew up the side seams. So you want to open the main fabric and the lining fabric out so that you can see the raw edges, and you are going to pin at the underarm seam and then go all the way down both sides, and I will show you when I'm done. Okay, so here it is all pinned together. There's lots of notches to match up, so there's notches on the middle part, then there's the middle seam, then there's the notch on the bodice part. I personally like to nest my, come on, focus. There we go. I like to nest my underarm seam, so I have one of the seam allowances lying this way, and I have the opposite seam allowance lying in the opposite direction, and then I kind of wriggle them together under my thumb like that, so they're properly aligned in the middle, and then I pin down both bits of seam allowance. Got that from quilting. Okay, so I have my side seam all sewn up. I am going to, I've pinked the edge, so I'm going to press this open. You have to press it from this side first, then this side, then I will press the underarm seam flat. So I'm going to just do the same to the other side, and then I'm going to press. Okay, so you're going to want to press these side seams open, and you're going to have to do it from the bottom to the middle, turn it around and do the same with the lining, and you're going to do that both sides. So once you've pressed your side seams open, you're going to want to open it out and just press this underarm area just to make it all lie flat. And you can see here, I think, there you go, you can see because we nested the seams, they've all intersected really nicely. We have a finished bodice and we have a finished skirt, so now we are going to attach the two. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments down below. I really hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye!